This is the second webinar that we're organising as part of the EaP Plus project. My colleague Svetlana will give you a brief overview of the project in the following minutes. So just to remind you, if you attended the first webinar in April, this acts as a follow-up webinar or a part 2 webinar, which is focused on innovation strategies and innovation management. The webinar will last just under 2 hours. Our guest speaker is Häfner, and he will be giving you the presentation today. Just a brief word on the technicalities. So for your information, this call will be recorded and it will be uploaded on the YouTube channel of the EaP Plus project. You can ask any questions during the webinar on the left-hand side of your Skype application. You can type your questions and I will collect them and the speaker will answer them at the end of the webinar. You have all been unmuted for clarity's sake, so that we don't have too many people making noise during the presentation. But yes, don't hesitate to ask anything on the chat. That's the basics, and now we can start the presentation with an overview of the project and of the webinar. On to you, Svetlana.
Very good. Good morning to everyone. So before going to the content of the webinar that will be presented by Peter Häfner, our guest expert, I would like just to remind you a few words about EaP Plus project. So in fact, EaP Plus full name is Science, Technology, Innovation International Cooperation Network for Eastern Partnership countries. And so what we do, in this project, we aim to stimulate cooperation between researchers from the Eastern Partnership countries and the European Union member states. And of course, we want to enhance the active participation of the Eastern Partnership countries organization in Horizon 2020 framework program. So we already are going for 2 years, this project. We cover all Eastern Partnership countries, and we have a number of objectives, so supporting dialogue, foster cooperation, enhancing participation. But I want just to tell you a few words about the activity to come, because some of them I hope will be interesting for you. So we will have a grant for Eastern Partnership researchers, countries' researchers to attend brokerage events. So there will be information day and other supports. So to join proposals, this will be done for EaP countries. We will have training for technology managers, have training seminars for policymakers. We're also having right now a grant scheme that is open to boost cluster cooperation. And if you know clusters in your countries, just share with them this information, because we will have this scheme open until the end of September, though there is still time to apply. Okay, so this is about innovation cluster collaboration between Europe and Eastern Partnership countries. And we have Horizon 2020 webinars organized by our partners, and also we are organizing 6 research development and innovation related webinars. And so this is actually on specific innovation related topic, exploitation issues, technology transfer, and other elements that stimulate research and innovation cooperation between Eastern Partnership countries and the European Union. We did an analysis. We asked actually different organizations with some questionnaires about the topics of interest, and based on this, we developed this webinars. Okay, the first webinar was in April. The second webinar is today. It means that many of you suggested to have a broad topic of innovation strategy and innovation management and how it's related. Okay, so that's what we'll discuss today. And the next webinar will be for December. I will say a few words later on. So it will be about exploitation. And all this information you can find on the website of the EaP Plus project. So yeah, right now I would like to give a word to Peter Häfner, who is our guest speaker. And Peter is Senior Innovation Manager and Head of Berlin and Leipzig office at Engage AG Germany. And so Peter will say a few words about his experience in innovation management and innovation strategies. But I just want to say that Peter works a lot with different technology projects, different organizations, private, public, and also with Horizon projects, of course. Yeah. Okay, so after this introduction, so we'll pass through different topics. Okay, we'll discuss a little bit about innovation management, innovation strategy, and what are the commercialization options to pursue, and how to manage the IP, because there are different options for IP protection, not necessarily legal. We also will discuss the innovation system, and how to encourage innovation organization, and then I'll say a few words about next webinar that will be on dissemination exploitation in innovation management, specifically in Horizon 2020 projects. And of course, as Morgan already said, if you have questions, please type them in the Skype window on the left side. And this webinar is recorded, so you can also come later and check some interesting topics. So please, Peter, welcome. Peter, are you there? Hello, Peter.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Does it work?
Yes.
Perfect. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, then I'll need to show you my screen. I hope that it works. Where was this? Sharing the screen. So now you should see the first slide. I'm going to tell you today a little bit about innovation and strategy, like Svetlana mentioned. First, I'll give you a very brief introduction, a very short sales pitch on what we're doing typically when we're not doing webinars. Then I'll give you a short introduction and how what we do today links to the first webinar we did in April, if I remember correctly. And then we'll start into the three topics Svetlana already mentioned, which commercialization routes to take, several approaches on how to deal with intellectual property, and how to keep the good ideas coming from your organization. So very briefly, Engage was founded roughly 15 years ago. We are active mostly in Germany, and we are supporting research organizations, mostly public research organizations like universities, but also non-university institutes like Leibniz or Helmholtz institutions, with the commercialization of their intellectual property, of their technologies, of their know-how. And we do this in very different aspects. We help them identifying what they have. We develop commercialization strategy together with them. And of course, we implement it if we're asked to do this. We have one specialty. If we see a really interesting idea, and if the researchers are interested, we set up startup companies together with them. Right now, I think we have 14 of them. There is a little fluctuation in this Of course, good ones come in, others leave. So right now, I think there are 14, and we have a very small seed fund for spin-offs, which is also integrated. And of course, as Svetlana mentioned, we are part of the INNO group. This is also the link to INNO TSD in France, in Sofia Antipolis. We also have activities in Sweden and in the UK, and now also a little in Italy, which is not represented on this map right now. What do we do for a living? Of course, IP asset management, how we like to call it. This is helping in commercialization efforts. Very closely linked to this is, of course, the question of how do research organizations get the money to develop innovation. And this brings us to what we call grant office. We help research organizations getting the necessary funding from public sources, sometimes from private sources, but mostly from public sources. Regional money, national money, European money. And of course, as I mentioned, we help setting up spin-offs, and sometimes we run those spin-offs ourselves. This for a very brief introduction. I'm with Engage already for the last 7 years. I spent a number of years in university before. I ran a program for supporting startups out of public research, and we did this in a number of public universities in Saxony, in Germany. So I know the public research system also from the inside. Before this, I worked for a while in the social sector, studied business and theoretical physics. So I know different sides of this business, which is not a one-dimensional business. So let's delve into the question of innovation and strategy. Those of you who took part in the last webinar, they know this slide. This is one depiction of the innovation process. You start out on the left side with many ideas, hopefully with many ideas. Then you try to, and these ideas typically come from your average research projects, ideas from students, from junior researchers. There are many sources. But then you screen them, or you should screen them, try to find out which of those might have commercial implications, some value to the industry, or some value to other technologies. If you're sure that there is some value in there, you try to ask around whether this is really the way, or really a fact, because quite often researchers have a different picture on the environment and on what is commercially viable than the industry itself. So somewhere in between this process, you have to go out and ask people from your targeted industry whether they actually need your technology or not, and what would be the value for them, and what should you change in your technology to make it more attractive to them. And then, of course, you need to develop a roadmap about what to do with your technology in order to finally sell them to a startup, or to sell a patent to the industry, or to make some sort of corporation. So this is the overall process. There are a lot of other schemes out there on how to describe the innovation process. And of course, I know this is not a sequential, linear process. There are sometimes situations where you need to go back and start over again because something happened and you have to start new or you have to modify your idea. But at least this helps to give some structure to a complicated process. In the last webinar, we dealt with a number of questions. We started with the questions of strategy and people. In the last webinar, we were more focused on single technologies. We talked about how to market your technology to the industry and what kind of market analysis you should do in order to find out whether your technology is actually viable. We talked briefly about intellectual property, patents and the like. We talked about development strategy, what to do in order to make your technology more valuable. Quite often the technology coming out of public research is rather narrow, and the industry is not in the position to take these narrow innovations up and combine them with others. So in order to make your technology valuable, you should do the matching with the topics left and right of your technology. And of course, we talked briefly about commercialization routes, how to actually realize the value within your technology or idea. So this brings us to the topics Svetlana already mentioned we want to discuss today. We want to go deeper into the question of which way to commercialize your innovation. What are the factors influencing the decision whether you want to create a startup or whether you just want to license or make an R&D contract? There are different things you should think about and which contribute to this decision. We are talking more deeply about IP strategies because IP and which is intellectual property, IP and rights, legal rights on this IP are an important element to attach commercial value to your IP, to protect it for you or your customers, in order not to have someone from somewhere else to simply steal your ideas and your innovation. There are different approaches to this. And last but not least, I want to give some thoughts on the innovation system within your organizations. Because I guess many of you started out that you simply had an innovative idea in your organization, in your group, or yourself, which is totally fine. And most of the people in our business started that way. But you realized the value of this typically by accident or because you were approached by someone from the industry or you found out yourself. But I'm pretty sure your organization, your university, your institute, whatever, has a lot more ideas. And in most of the times, it really makes sense to think about how to help these future ideas grow and develop in order to fill the pipeline, in order to have the innovations ready 5 years from now. So these are the three main topics, and I will switch over to the question of commercialization routes. At first, a brief introduction on the challenges you face when doing commercialization. This is also a slide we had last time as well. I guess without really knowing, but I would guess most of you come from the research side, from the public research side, so you're typically very good in finding things out, in creating knowledge, maybe giving even a little proof of concept, finding out whether a certain technology or technical approach would work for a specific problem of real life. But this is very early at the start, and what you want to achieve is you want to make sure that somehow your innovation actually reaches market entry. You don't have to do this necessarily yourself. Most of the time, you won't do this yourself because you are at a research organization, and research organizations are not made to develop products and to market products. So you have to find partners, other actors to do this. And it would be really nice if there wouldn't be this valley in between those two, or between the starting point and the end point of this travel. But unfortunately, there is some gap in between, and most work of people in technology transfer, in innovation transfer, is about closing this gap of competence and this gap of funding. Because pretty early you will realize that universities or research organizations are not even allowed to invest money into developing products, because of course your job is to educate students, your job is to create new knowledge, but it is not about developing products and selling them on the marketplace. And there are different approaches to how to close this gap, and this is what we call, or what I would call, commercialization routes. Which pathway you should take to bridge this gap in order to make your innovation successful. And in case of success, of course, this would create revenues both for your research organizations and, of course, private investors and private actors who helped the marketing of this product. There is a number of tasks to be dealt with, which I will not go into detail at this point. And this is also a slide you might remember from the last workshop. This is about different commercialization routes, and you could order them depending on the risks and the necessary investments involved, and on what kind or what share of the revenues you as a research organization or you as a researcher would actually get back. So you could arrange this on this line. The easiest and most typical thing for a public research organization would be selling or licensing of IP. You create some sort of knowledge, some sort of technology, you try to protect your IP as good as possible, and then you sell it to someone who develops it further into a product and finally sells it on the marketplace. This involves not much risk, of course, because most of the risk stays with the commercial actor, but you will only get a limited share of the profits out of your innovation. This quite often will actually get combined with some sort of R&D cooperation, where the company who wants to license your IP is going to ask you, could you please develop some things further? And then they will pay for this. Maybe you can combine this with some public funding from the European Commission or from some national sources, whatever is available. This increases the amount of money you might get out of your innovation, but this also might need some investments or could bear the risk of not being successful and the company saying, well, we're going to leave. Then the next thing on the ladder would be to create your own startup, where you do a lot more of the tasks needed to sell and to develop a product. This increases your risk quite a lot. A lot of startups actually fail or close down with at least zero profits, if not significant losses. So a lot of the risks stay with the startup, not necessarily with a research organization, because this is one of the reasons you create a startup, because that way you can capsule your risks a little. On the other side, when getting the first revenues from the marketplace, when selling the company to someone larger, bigger, you will get a significant larger share of the profits, of course. This is financially much more attractive. Then, of course, there's the option of doing joint ventures and or developing or selling products yourself. This is not really common because this leaves a lot of risks and a lot of investment needs with a research organization. And most of research organizations are not prepared doing this. But sometimes there might be a need or a possibility to do so, particularly if you're in a very small market niche and with the need for a lot of investments in expensive equipment. So when thinking about which commercialization route to take, there's a number of questions you or your organization should ask itself. The first is, how much effort are you actually willing to contribute? Because this will take a lot of time, and this is not research. This is commercialization activity. This is market analysis. This is going out finding partners. This is fundraising, a lot of fundraising. And the farther you want to go on the line from last slide, the more effort you would have to invest. And if an organization or if an individual researcher wants to do this, they should think about this before. How much time and how much effort am I willing to invest into this? I hear this quite often, that particularly young researchers come to us and say, well, I want to set up my own startup, and then, of course, in parallel, I want to do my PhD, and then I have a young family, and the second child is already in the works. And then you need to tell them, well, you better decide what is most important to you, because it is very, very difficult and not really often successful to do all three or even a fourth thing on top. So you should think about this really carefully. And then, of course, you should think about what competences you could contribute beyond the technical competences, and what competences would you need additionally? What are the people you need to hire or you need to partner with in order to do successful. You should also try to find out what kind of support would be available to you. Support from your research organization, maybe there is some tech transfer office in your organizations which could help, or the local economic development agency has some support available, or your national government has a funding program to specific routes of I just described. So, but this you have to find out for your country. This differs very much even within the European Union and probably much more in the countries you're coming from. And then of course you should ask yourself and maybe your partner of how much risk are you actually willing to take? Do you actually want to invest a significant amount of money in your idea? Or are you willing to take a credit from the bank, a loan from the bank, in order to commercialize your idea? Or would you really want to do this? And of course, you should get a realistic picture on what stage you're actually with your technology. And this is something scientists typically overestimate. They think their technology is much farther than someone from the industry would tell them. So for at least to answer this question, and also to answer the last question, you should go out and ask people who did this already. Because also when trying to find out what kind of money you need for the additional R&D, until a technology, a prototype is actually ready to be sold as a product. This is something the scientist typically doesn't have any realistic idea about. So, at least for the last two questions, please go out and ask people who've done this before. Having said that, I will give a short overview on the individual commercialization routes. I will do this in this kind of standardized format. It's some sort of a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, and then the benefits and the risks involved. The strengths or the pro for selling or licensing IP is you can focus on what you're good at. You can focus on research and leave the commercial things to your industrial partner who licenses your IP. And for this, you also don't need much additional money for application-oriented research. And if you actually need to do some application-oriented research, because, for example, your industrial partner asks you to do so, then they will typically pay for this. This I will go into on the next slide in a little more detail. So the main strength is this is quite relatively simple for the research organization. Of course, there are downsides. And the most important downside is that intellectual property from public research is typically very early. It is way too early to base a product on this and to directly transfer it into a product, which causes a number of problems. The first is finding customers for this early know-how is not really easy. It's very, very seldom, although a lot of researchers try to believe this, that people line up and want to buy your patent. But they are not. They are not lining up to buy your patent. You have to go out and work hard to convince people that your technology would be the best approach to solve a specific industrial problem. And then you might be able to enter into licensing agreements. And of course, you will not earn that much money with this, because there is still for the industry a lot of risk involved whether your technology, which worked in the lab, would actually work in an industrial environment. So you will not get that much money from this, and if you want to make it more valuable by developing it further, you would need more money, which would typically not be available from research organizations, because your rector or your president will tell you, well, the university's money is for education and research, and not for making an innovation more profitable to the industry. So your benefits, your revenues are typically a sales revenue or a licensing fee, but revenues are typically rather low, with the exception of medical fields, but there the risks are way larger, and this is a very special field. And as a recommendation, of course, people try to offer you, and also research organizations want to have upfront fees, a fixed fee for which to license or sell a patent, for example. This tends to be very low. And typically, this covers your costs you had on the IP, and maybe a little more, not much more. So you should try to negotiate about variable fees based on the income the company licensing your IP makes with it. Let's say I want to have maybe 5% of all revenues you do with my technology 5 years from now. This can change over time. This could be limited. There are all sorts of options. But this makes it easier for the industry to give you more money, because they only have to give you more money when they realize an actual commercial success. Of course, there is the risk involved for you. Will there be a commercial success or not? And one other major risk is that you could only rely on the legal protection. So if you are in the situation of having a very valuable patent, there is quite a good chance that someone simply tries to attack this patent. This could be attacked legally, but this could also be simply circumvented, or they simply use your patent and lie you in the face. We didn't use your patent. And this would be difficult because it costs you a lot of money to sue a company. So these are the risks. The second option is R&D cooperation. The good side is you can still focus on what you're good at, technological stuff, development work, etc. And the other things, the commercial things, are taken care of by your industrial customer. Of course, the downside is it's difficult to find someone willing to contract you. Not only because it's difficult to find a customer, but it's also difficult to convince them that a public research organization is actually able to meet the needs of a company. Because universities tend to be very slow. It's difficult to keep good talent at a university because the industry pays more. So you might, or it might happen to you that your best students or your junior researchers leave you for a more attractive job in the industry. So there are a number of difficulties involved, which lets, at least in Germany, a number of companies think twice about contracting R&D work to university, because they say, we don't want to sponsor public research, we want to get results, and we want to get results quickly. So this might be a problem. The benefits are actually quite good. You will get immediate money, because typically this kind of stuff needs to get paid up front. You will get the money and then you start, or you get part of the money and then you start. You're also quite free to calculate as you wish. Unless you are in the EU, then you have to consider some rules determining the lower limits of your price. On the other hand, you get only paid for your work. You will not get a share of the commercial success of your innovation. So it might be interesting to combine this with, for example, licensing your IP with a variable component. The risk is you will lose track and credibility with the scientific community, because many scientists will tell you, well, this is not real science anymore. This is industrial work, and with a lot of scientists, industrial work is synonymous with ugly work, not valuable work. So you should take care of this, and you should get the backing of your research organization, of your dean or of your rector, if you want to do this, because you might need it when other things are discussed in the research organization. It's about rooms, or it's about who will get equipment and stuff like this. These are typically the situations when your colleagues are not doing so much applied work will point at you, well, this is not a real scientist, this is a hired gun of the industry. So this might be a risk. The next thing is startups. This is actually talked about quite a lot, and there's a lot of politicians talk a lot about startups. You read a lot about startups in the news media. So, and startups, of course, have a number of strengths when you're talking about commercialization routes. And the main strength is that by creating a startup, you create an entity which is focused solely on commercializing your innovation. This startup has only one goal: making the most out of your innovation. This startup doesn't have to teach or to educate students. They don't have to deliver research. They need to develop and sell products. And that way you can design a roadmap which is totally oriented on commercial success. And it's also a lot easier to find relevant subsidies than when you would do this as a research organization. There is, for example, the EU SME instrument within Horizon 2020. There is a number of national funds, but this depends, of course, very much on the country you're living in, or where you're setting up the company. Actually, at least we in Germany, we experience it quite a lot, that young teams from particularly Eastern Europe come to Berlin. In Berlin, particularly from the ICT industry, and they set up their company in Berlin because funding is much better in Germany than in a number of Eastern European countries. And the main strength is that, of course, by setting up a company, you will participate in the market success of your innovation. There are significant weaknesses. Number one weakness is, if you're an excellent researcher, most of the time you're not an excellent entrepreneur as well. Most of the time. You can prove me wrong in every single case, but I experience this. Excellent researchers are typically only mediocre entrepreneurs at best. Some of them are really bad at being entrepreneurs and running a company. So you should keep this in mind, and you should keep a realistic picture on this. And of course, it takes sometimes a very long time till significant money flows back to research organizations. Because maybe a typical startup, when you're a VC, a venture capitalist company, they talk about 5 to 6 years. But then you would need, I would say, roughly another 5 years, additional 5 years, in order to make a startup out of public research VC ready. So in total, this would mean you could sell your company at a significant profit maybe 10 years after your innovation. So you're waiting, for example, as a research organization, 8 to 10 years before some money will flow back to you. Maybe you can speed this process a little up when you sell or license IP to your startup. This is what universities typically do, also for legal reasons. So maybe you'll get some money back already after 6 or 7 years, but not much earlier. So you should keep this in mind. You could get big money, but only late. Benefits, of course, you can realize the actual commercial value of your company. And you could realize this by the textbook case would be going public, selling shares at the stock exchange, initial public offering, IPO is the technical term for this. Quite more often is that you do what we call a trade sale. You sell your startup to a larger company who is simply looking for innovation. Some of you might even want to run this company until you retire, or at least for a long time. You want to leave research and go to a company. This is also a way to benefit from startups. Of course, the risks are very significant. Of course, there are all sorts of market risks. The market might change, the environment might change, the legal environment might change, political changes might influence the market for your product. There's a large number of risks which each and every one of them could kill your company easily. But there are 2 risks I see quite often which are research typical. First risk is you run your company like a research organization. A company is not a research organization, and you should run it accordingly. So more speed, you don't need to solve every single last scientific problem. If your product works, fine, go sell it. And the second risk is many researchers or many young entrepreneurs have their difficulties to accept large shareholders from outside. For example, funds or VCs or even industrial capital. Because they think, well, we will lose control, we don't own our innovation anymore, and someone will steal it from them. This might happen. There are some bad people out there, so this might happen. But most of the time, if someone gives you money, invests in your company, and of course get shares for this, they will let you run the company because you know your company best. And if you can prove you are the best to realize the value within your technology, then you will stay in control. On the other hand, this money enables you to realize significant increases in value which you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So startups are interesting, but not for everyone. The last option would be, one could say, sell things alone or together with the company. The major strength would be success depends mostly on you. So you are in control and you decide what happens to this innovation. which could also be the main weakness. That's why this sentence is both in the strengths and the weaknesses field. Of course, you don't need to share with others too much. But this is probably not the way if you have a large innovation which needs a lot of investment, market investment, a sales force, salespeople, whatever, a lot of additional development. So this is something we actually quite, or at least sometimes see if you have very expensive or complicated equipment needed for this innovation. And the industry will only need small numbers of products. So this could be the opportunity for research organizations to sell small batches of products, to make some money on the side. But these are special situations. Sometimes they will work. I have a customer right around the corner here in Leipzig who actually does this. The downside is that you will need to provide most of the money needed from within your organization for all the jobs involved, also the commercial aspects. You might to take up insurance for the quality of your product and things like this. And this will create also some difficult conflict within your research organization, because you do a lot of things different than a scientist will do. And if you're thinking to do this within your research organization compared to, for example, doing this by creating a startup, success will often be small without the help of external capital, because no one from outside would invest into university. The benefits would be immediate returns for you. When you sell a product, you get the money immediately, and you don't need middlemen. Of course, you have to bear all sorts of risks, like startups, and you might face some potential risk from the legal side, because you are typically a public research organization, and there are limits on what a public organization is allowed to do. So, in ending this, I want to deal with three myths or three misbeliefs I see quite often. The first thing is startups are the best way for technology transfer and commercialization. This is something you hear a lot from the political side. You hear a lot from people who never created a startup themselves. So you should be aware that there are high risks for getting your return, your financial return, and the big money everyone hopes for when creating a startup will get back to you only after many years. And even the best political wishful thinking and the most public money invested in your startup will not make for a good company. And this depends also on the continent, I would say. It's a much more viable and more common option if you're in the United States, because there's a totally different culture when dealing with startups, and when dealing also with failing startups, compared to, at least to Western Europe. I'm not really sure about Eastern Europe. I don't have the experience, but you should think twice when having an innovation out of public research. The second thing is selling or protecting IP and then selling or licensing IP will leave you free from all the hassles. This is not true, because, as I mentioned, your IP is very early and you need to spend a lot of efforts to convince prospective customers to actually buy your IP. If you want to be free of all hassles, you will probably not sell or license a single patent. And the last thing is, many people in the R&D or in the tech transfer field consider research and development collaborations, joint projects with the industry, as quite dull and financially not attractive. Of course, they will not promise the kind of revenues you will get when you sell a very successful startup at the stock exchange. But you will get money quite immediately, and money doesn't have different colors. So your research organization doesn't care whether you get the money out of a licensing deal or from an industrial project. You will get money. And typically it becomes much bigger than other revenues. And you could even combine this with public grants on industrial collaboration. Okay, I hope this gave you some overview on how to deal with the different commercialization rights. Now let's switch over to IP strategies. Very brief introduction about IP. The basic rationale when dealing about IP or talking about IP and IP rights is I want to protect my intellectual accomplishment and prevent others from commercializing my idea without me. So this is the general idea. There are three different interest groups. You as the employee or as the inventor, you want a recognition of your inventive contribution, your creative contribution, and you want to have some money out of this in the best of cases. The society itself, by granting patents, for example, they want to promote an innovative economic environment. And finally, the industry, the company, for example, buying or licensing your patent, they want a chance to refinance some of the money they invested into research and development. So these are the three phases of intellectual property rights. Why is IP critical for innovation at all? First, you can prevent a competitor from using your innovation without paying it, or even prevent the patenting of your innovation. I saw even this. One guy from a university had an innovation and said, I don't want to patent, it's so complicated, and whatever. And a year later, he came back and said, well, someone I dealt with applied for a patent with exactly my technology. And then I could only tell him, well, I told you, why did you apply for this patent? And of course, that way you can protect the core idea upon which a startup or a commercialization of a technology is founded. And that way you could create and maintain a competitive advantage. It would be difficult and expensive for your competition to use your technology. You could place roadblocks for others, and you could also remove roadblocks by cross-licensing. This is, for example, what many of the large smartphone companies do, or IT companies do this quite regularly, because every one of them has hundreds or even thousands of patents covering technology the other company uses. But this goes vice versa. So typically, not always, but typically, they cross-license, and that way they open the field for all of the major players. Sometimes this doesn't work. You might remember the patent wars between Samsung and Apple a couple of years ago. I don't know why they did this, but typically they cross-license. patents are very attractive for investors. This is not always based on facts, but investors typically like patents very, very much. You could also use this to secure financing by licensing your patent to others, for example, in a different field than than the field you actually want to sell a product in. And of course, this would increase your company reputation and the brand value. And now, of course, you will ask, why should I, as a university, for example, should think about this? You need to think about this because your customer needs to think about this. And when you try to sell an innovation to a company, they will ask you, is there a patent involved? Because maybe not all the points I mentioned will hold true for a university, but they will hold true for the company. And by helping the company achieve these goals I just mentioned, you will help increase the commercial value of your innovation. So this is the reason for creating IP, even as a public research organization. There are quite some common problems with public IP. The first and the single most difficult problem is the lack of a big picture and an innovation strategy early on. People approach us quite often, they say, well, I have this technology and I want to create a patent. Then we say, fine, let's do it. But what for? What do you want to achieve? What are your customers? What are the target markets? What are the needs of the industry someone could solve with this? And then people shrug and say, well, we didn't think of this. We don't know where the main markets would be. And then we have to tell them, well, you should better get back and solve these problems because they are important for deciding which IP strategy to actually go or to use. This, for example, decides on in which countries you actually apply for a patent. And this will move big money. So you need to develop an IP strategy early on. What to protect, where to protect, what could be protected in the future, things like this. The next big problem is, it's typically a beginner's problem, is that you publish something about your technology before you apply for a patent. Most people do this without thinking about it. They say, well, as a university we publish. Yes, you can publish, but if you want to apply for a patent, you should do this before. This is even a matter of days. You can publish or you can speak at a conference, but you have to apply for your patent the day before, otherwise it's gone. That's the way it is. Another typical problem is for people from universities, they are granting exclusivity in critical fields too early or without a clear strategy, because they are so happy that someone from the industry is actually interested in their technology that they are willing to accept almost every aspect of a deal. And we advise, please get a clearer picture, please get the big picture. What would be other companies who could be interested? Would those other companies may be willing to pay more for your patent than the company who's asking for exclusivity? Of course, you need to create an attractive IPR package. This might involve nationalizing patents in other countries, things like this. And also something we see quite a lot, at least here in Germany, is that companies or that universities create joint IP with a company. This is typically done because that way the company will pay for the patent application and the legal fees. And in return for this, they will get mentioned as inventor. The main problem is that way the company will never have to pay some license fee to you. So if you do this joint IP, do a contract, an accompanying contract, where you can detail what the company is allowed to do with this IP and what they're not allowed to do. Just a short look to get an idea of what the costs are. A European patent, the average European patent will cost you about 30,000. US patents are on a similar scale. And then, of course, you have to pay annual fees between $500 and $2,000. In the US, it's a little more. But if you want to do patents in a number of countries, in interesting countries, maybe half a dozen European countries, the US, maybe Japan, you're very quickly talking about 200, 300, even 400,000 euros for one patent in all of those countries. So patents are not cheap, they are quite expensive. And then people will say, well, I can do a patent, for example, in Germany. A patent only in Germany would cost you much less, maybe 10,000, maybe 15,000, roughly like this. But then you get only protection in Germany. In France or in the UK or in the US, everyone could do with your technology if they want. So that's why you have to get the big picture early on in order to decide what to do with these costs. So this is, you have to consider costs versus benefit. Also, facts to consider is the strength of your patent. Not each patent is equal to another patent. Process patents are typically less strong than others. How easy is it to identify a violation of your patent? It could be quite obvious and you could detect it in the lab, or it could be difficult if it's only a production process, which is patented. And also how willing your research organization, for example, is to enforce your patent. This could be very expensive, for example, enforcing patent in the US. So these are things you should also consider. And this is what I mentioned before. Intellectual property has a substantial effect, particularly on the investor's valuation. Investors consider patents as a significant contribution to the value of a company. So these are numbers I found in the literature. Granted patents increase the value by roughly a third if the number of granted patents double. If the number of patent applications doubles, the company would almost increase 50% in value. This is not always a rational consideration. This is more of a gut consideration on the side of the investors. So what would be typical situations when dealing with IPR? Of course, one effect is you could keep competition at bay, prevent others from using your technology. You could earn money by licensing it, but as I mentioned before, you will not earn that much money. It's, of course, a nice small income, but not much money. And you will increase reputation. A lot of research organizations do this to increase reputation. And you could defend against patent demands, but this is more for commercial companies. A very brief look at IP rights. There are several kinds. Patents you probably all know. But you could also deal with IP by simply keeping it a secret. This is done a lot in engineering because people know it's very difficult to enforce a patent in China. But there is a lot of Chinese people reading every patent application coming from Europe and looking how to copy it. So keeping it a secret might be a very interesting strategy. Of course, you could do copyright for software. You could apply for a trademark, also for design protection. You could simply be quick. This is done by a lot of companies that they say, well, the legal process for applying for a patent will take you 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. In 4 years, I developed 2 complete generations of my technology. So I'm simply faster than my competition, and I keep things secret. So this is the best protection. I will not apply for patents. And the last strategy would be, which happens quite often in the IP, in the ICT world, is open source. So simply not protect, publish your IP, and then find other ways to create revenues. And you could develop certain strategies out of this. Of course, there is the legal strategy, where you rely solely on legal measures. You apply for patents and you combine this with copyright for things which are not patentable, and then you trademark the name of your technology and protect the design of your product, whatever. This is expensive, but it works, of course. Then this is what I call the Greyhound strategy. Simply be much faster than the pack. So people are free and they will copy your technology. But when they are finished copying your technology, which will take them maybe a year, maybe 2 years, you are already 2 steps further ahead, and that way you can keep your competitive advantage. You should combine this with keeping things secret, that way being the smart Greyhound. You could also combine this with cheap legal strategies. A copyright or a trademark are 2 factors less costly than a patent. A copyright you will get in Europe for free. In the US you have to apply for a couple $100. A trademark will cost you maybe a couple €100, maybe 1,000 euros, but that's it. So this gives you limited protection. And then, of course, there would be the open source, the community approach, where you, of course, protect things by copyright, but you publish it. And these copyrights are then licensed by these typical open source licensing models. You probably encountered those somewhere on the internet, where people are free to use your software. They are free to use it even for commercial purposes, but when they do commercial things with it, they have to apply the same rights for others to reuse their software. And there are other ways to profit from these kind of developments. Well-known approaches are, for example, Linux. A lot of people of you probably use Linux. And this is open source, but a lot of companies profit from this. Typo 3 content management system is another common example for this. So these are strategies you should consider early on when talking about IP strategy and how and where to protect your intellectual property. Now getting to the last part, all of this I talked till now and in the last webinar was dealing with an individual technology where you already had an innovation and then think about what to do with this innovation. But this last point is how to fill your pipeline of innovative ideas, how to make your organization create more innovative ideas, and how to streamline, how to manage this process. And this would be something like an innovation system. There you also would have to talk about culture. Does your research organization have an innovation culture? Is it accepted that you try to create industrial innovation, or is this a bad thing to do? Of course, one could talk endlessly about these things. So I will limit myself to 3 factors I found out in the last decades to be important. The first thing is your organization has to accept and formulate innovation as an organizational goal. Typically, if you're, for example, a university, your goals are teaching, education, and research. If you want to be an innovative organization, you have to accept a third goal, innovation. And you have to live this. The second thing is you have to set some sort of support. You have to create maybe an innovation department, a tech transfer department. This doesn't need to be very costly. You don't need 10 or 15 or 20 people. You could do this on the cheap if needed. I know most of your organizations are not very well funded. You don't have that much money, but some sort of specialized support is needed. And then it would be very nice to have at least small dedicated resources. What do I mean by those 3 factors? When thinking about the first, innovation as an organizational goal, you need to be very clear and explicit about innovation. It's not like, well, we do this. It would be very good if in the core policy of your organization, innovation is mentioned as an important goal. And it should be equal to research and teaching. And this should happen in writing, explicitly in writing, but also from the heart. And most importantly, you need your leadership, your rector, your vice rectors, your deans, your professors need to actually support this. And not only support this when there is some public money to get. In Germany, I see this even after, we talk about innovation since the early 2000s. And there is a lot of public money going into the research infrastructure for innovation. And whenever there's a grant or a subsidy to collect public money to collect, every rector will tell you, we are so strong on innovation and innovation is so important to us. But when you ask them, we need small money, 20,000, 50,000 to create a prototype, which is needed to convince a company. They will tell you, no, research is much more important. We don't have this money, and innovation is our deal. So they are not really putting their money where their mouth is. You should convince your leadership that they actually put actions where their mouth is. So you need this support. And you should introduce this goal also in your management systems and controlling systems. And some of you might have performance indicators. For example, a lot of research organizations in Germany, they evaluate their researchers by the number of publications they produce, and by impact factors and stuff like this. So what does a scientist do if the only measurement system is publication? They will produce publications. And if you want to commercialize an innovation, this will lead to a reduced number in publications, because this will be a lot of work, I mentioned this. So you should better compensate for this. In Germany, we are not really good at this, I have to admit. But for example, in Singapore, I once saw a university, they had even some kind of price list. They said, if you sell the patent, this equals 1 publication. And if you sell this with above a certain revenue, this equals an A journal publication. So there were very clear benefits for commercial innovations. And if you want to encourage innovation, you need to make it beneficial to the researchers. What also helps is role models. Talk about people who have been already successful in selling innovation, creating innovation. And you should also hire people accordingly. If you only hire people who love to look into computers or who love to work in the lab tirelessly, you will not get good innovators, because good innovators also would need to communicate with the marketplace. They need to communicate with partners. If you only people who don't really like to communicate, you will not get good innovation out of your organization. So these are the things you should keep in mind when talking about innovation as an organizational goal. The second thing is you will need specialized support. This could or this should be a specialized unit with your organization. This specialized unit would have people, maybe people like me, who know both sides, who know the technical side, but who know also the commercial side. And those could, for example, help you identify innovation among all of your knowledge you produce. They could assess technologies, give you alternative opinions and feedback on how to develop innovations, how to commercialize innovations. And they could give commercial supports. They could also help with fundraising. This is actually something which increases acceptance among researchers quite a lot. So when tech transfer people in Germany try to install tech transfer people into institutes, into groups, they tell you, well, they will also help you fundraise and get competitive grants. And then suddenly, those tech transfer people are everybody's friend, because everyone is interested in money. Of course, specialized personnel will cost you money. I know this, and I know most of you will not have much of this money. But it's not only about money. This could also be one research assistant of yours, which says, well, I will focus, let's say, half of my time on this staff. It's also not about the number of staff. It's the cases in Germany I know. Of course, there are research organizations. They have 40 people, they have 50 people, but those are not the most successful ones. They have the most staff, but not the most success. It's more about that you have motivated people. Some would say crazy guys who really love getting some innovation out of public research, who love innovation and getting things changed. So you could, to a certain degree, could do this on the cheap, at least for a while. So the argument, we don't have that much money, is not a real valid one, at least to start. And the last thing, of course, this deals also with resources, with money. But this is also something we are talking in Germany right now a lot, because one thing is to have government grants for innovation. They help a lot, but they're typically very slow. They follow administrative processes which could be difficult. They would be only available in the beginning of each year or only in even years. I don't know. They're strange rules sometimes. So it would be good to have small funds, very small resources, to get one step further in the innovation process. Maybe you want to actually build a prototype and need a specific tool, or you need to buy some material. So, and for this, you would actually need cash. And it helps quite a lot if you could provide this cash from inside your organization or together with the help of a partner. But you need to do this quickly, and you should be flexible. And I specifically advise against spending too much money, because what I found over the years, if you advertise large grants for innovation, suddenly every scientist does innovation simply to get the 1 million or 2 million advertised. And then they take this 2 million and they do research as they did before, and the day they get the money, they forget about innovation. And if you give scientists too much money at once, you attract the wrong people. If someone is really innovative and wants to step forward with his or her innovation, they will accept this. They take a small sum of money, do another step, maybe they get another small sum of money. That way you can also implement accountability in the process. So this is something you might want to think about. This actually helps a lot. We, in Germany, are only in the process of starting these kind of things. In Germany, we spend a lot of money on research and innovation, but sometimes not in the smartest way. This, I think, would be a very smart way to invest money. Maybe you can convince people in your regional, national governments to maybe give this a try. Yes, this would be my last actual slide. Are there any questions or comments you had? Maybe you, Svetlana, or Morgan could sum up the questions.
Yes, hi Peter. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I don't know if you want to take the question at the end or if you want to take it now.
This is the end, actually.
This is your final slide. Brilliant.
Yeah, I have one more slide advertising the next webinars. And then I have one slide advertising myself. So if you want to get in touch with me, here are my contact information. But that's it.
Sure. Okay. So, well, thank you very much. We had a great turnout. Over 40 participants joined the webinar. So thank you very much. I think everyone was happy to return and to listen to this second webinar on RDI innovation. We had one question that was addressed to you, which is if you could give 1 or 2 concrete examples of non-legal protection.
Yeah, non-legal protection would be the most important. Non-legal protection would be to keep things secret, to make sure things are actually secret. This has an organizational side. You have to make sure that that no one communicates about this. This is particularly difficult when you're a research organization, because research organizations are getting paid for talking about new knowledge. So if you want to commercialize a technology and protect it in a non-legal way, you have to actually decide whether you want to keep it a secret and whether this is, in the big picture, beneficial for you and your organization. Typically, this would mean if we want, or if we have to keep it secret, we want more money from our industrial customer who actually commercializes the technology. As a company, of course, you have to make sure that no one tells about this. You should limit the number of people who actually know about the secrets. And of course, you should try to protect this also technically. For example, you could build it into a black box and then close it quite well. to make it difficult for a competitor to find out. And this is one non-legal approach to protection, and the other non-legal approach would be simply be faster. And this is something, one of the first startups out of university I encountered was an electronics company. They did electronics where you could manage servers from far away over the internet. They did this back in that days. They did this by electronics. Now they only implement it via chips. But in the late 90s, they had electronics, and they said we don't do patents because this takes a long time. It costs a lot of money, and when we get actually the patent granted, the technology is already outdated. No one would license it. And if we try to enforce the patent, we have to check the inner workings of all our competitors' products, whether they use our protected technology, which is also a lot of effort and a lot of money we need to spend. We simply want to spend this money. Other people spend on patents. We spend this for development, very rapid development, very quick development. And they were very successful by this approach until they entered the American market. The week they set up a camp in the US, they had lawyers approaching them. Well, you violated this and that strange patent. And this is quite common in the US because in the US you have something what is commonly called patent trolls. They are they are commercial activities, but they are not actually selling products. They simply only own patents and try to bring others to court over violations, over infringements. So, and this CEO told me he never talked about patents, but when he entered the US market, he actually bought patents from others in order to be able to fire back. And he described it to me a little like in the Cold War days when we had the Americans and the Russians, and each of those had nuclear rockets, and this was mutually assured destructions. If one would fire their rocket, all of them would die. And this holds true to a certain degree to patent strategies in the US. You need a lot of patents to show to a competitor or to show to a patent troll, well, you are also infringing my patents. Why we just could cross-license and then we're fine. But back to the question, non-legal strategies would be, to me, secrecy and speed. Does this answer your question?
Yes, I believe the person has just said. Thank you, Peter. It was very informative. I have one more question for you, Peter, from Piotr. Sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. He asks, do you know how methodology can be used to evaluate the idea we work on? When is the best time to go on the market? And when is the best time to look for financing? Is it at the technology readiness level 4, or is it better to bring it up at the technology readiness level 7?
There is no easy answer to this. First, I don't have a fixed methodology to assign a value to a certain technology, because the value depends very much on what you could do with your technology and who would do this. Something which is of no value to me could be of much value to my neighbor. So the only way to find out the real value of your technology is actually entering the marketplace with this. So I don't have a methodology to assign a value. Having said that, I would quote a colleague from Dresden University, a guy very successful in commercializing electronic stuff for cell phones and mobile networks. And he said, good commercialization starts with research planning. You should start thinking about commercializing your idea the day you start thinking about what to do research on. This means you should enter as early as possible conversations with the industry on what they need. So in terms of TRL, 4 is quite late to start discussing with the industry. You could start discussing at TRL 2, because this helps you to steer your efforts, to steer your research in the right direction. And TRL 7 is definitely too late, because for TRL 7, you need to know already applications for your technology. You should know what an industrial user would do with your technology. And you can't know this simply by sitting in your office or in your lab. You need to have discussions with the technology, with the industry on what to do with this. These discussions are not necessarily licensing negotiations or stuff like this. But you should spend significant time in discussing with people from the industry what they're actually looking for. And when you find this out, or get an idea into which directions the industry thinks and what their actual real pressing needs are, then you are able to move into the right direction. I know a lot of people who claim to have reached TRL 7. Technically, maybe they did, but still, no one is interested in their technology because simply they moved into the wrong direction. So this could be the main lesson. Start as early as possible to think about how to commercialize your technology. This doesn't mean by starting the discussion or by start thinking about this that you will sell your technology tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Maybe you simply have to agree, well, now I know what the industry wants. The industry sees, well, you are well prepared with your technological background to find solutions. Let's meet 1 year from now and let's rediscuss what you found. And in 1 year, you can go from TRL 3 to TRL 5, for example, and then you can revisit. And maybe then they will say, well, you probably need another half year, but maybe we give you already a little money to do specific things. And with this little money and some public money or some university money, you could go from TRL 5 to TRL 6, something like this. So please start as early as possible to think about commercialization, otherwise it's too late. This is what we see quite often. People come to us, we have this patent. Could you find customers for this patent? And then we need to say, well, this is way too late. Finding customers takes a lot of time. Then you lose 1 year, maybe you lose 2 years. Then you have the question on where to nationalize. There are very limited time frames on doing this. So the earlier you start thinking about commercialization, the better.
Peter, Svetlana speaking. Yeah. The question is also when it's good looking for finance at stage TLR4 or at TLR7, and I also would say in the same way as you just answered, there could be different strategy. It depends if there are enough money for development and in which level of discussion with industrials we have, and so on, right? So there is no single answers. For the looking for finance, what is your experience? Actually, this is a part of the same question about best time to go on the market and when it's the best time to looking for financing. There could be also public funding and private funding, right? So it's
maybe
can
I
I
could
say a
add
few words
to
about
this.
financing at different stage? Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very interesting aspect. Thank you, Svetlana. What we see a lot on the national level in Germany, national funding, but also on the level of European funding. Many of those calls, many of those programs require some industrial partners to take part, even in programs or in calls which are directed at TRL4, or where you should reach TRL4 or TRL5. You should already bring a clear picture of how to commercialize, or in EU speak, on how you exploit your technologies. This will be dealt with in one of the later webinars, I don't know, Svetlana, December or next year. There will be a special webinar focused on this kind of things. But when you already have some relations to the industry, this will help you get funding, public funding. And of course, it will help you get private funding because, of course, you will have to know the companies who should give you money. So it's not easy to say when to apply for funding on which TRL, because there are funding opportunities for different stages of technological development. And this, of course, differs very much on the country you're coming from, on the direction you want to go, and of course on the TRL you're on. So this, but my experience is, in most of those cases, it helps a lot when you are able to show that you have some links to the industry and that you know what you are doing in terms of in which direction to commercialize. 10 years ago in Germany, it was enough to tell about patents. So many research organizations bought a lot of patents, expensive patents, which never generate revenues, most of them. And then the federal ministry realized, well, it might not be enough to simply buy patents. You should only also buy ideas on what to do with this. And now they're explicitly asking for contributions from companies, even in earlier programs dealing with technologies on TRL 4 or 5.
Hello?
Yeah? Hello?
Yes, it was cut.
Yes.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
There was also a comment. Yeah, there was also a comment. I don't see if you see it on the left window, that TLR is not enough to evaluate the maturity to reach the market. Yeah,
of course.
As you said, exactly.
I believe there were no other questions on the part of participants. I'm looking at the chat, but I believe we answered all three. I will leave participants just a moment now to write down anything if they wish to.
And in the meantime, perhaps I will say that, yeah, as Peter already mentioned, there will be next webinar in December and January around dissemination exploitation in Horizon 2020 or in bilateral projects. The approach could be quite similar, and it will be about, yeah, how to increase the impact and what is the exploitation plan, how to do this, which questions should be answered, what are potential difficulties, example from concrete projects, and so on. So you will get information about this, but already now. So if you have already some suggestions about people who prepared and implemented such exploitation plan in a bilateral or European projects and FP7 in Horizon, so please let us know, because then we'll be happy to discuss with them, also invite them to the webinar to participate. Perhaps we can have a small discussion all together with the participants. And also we would like to receive your concrete questions about this topic. So if we have these questions in advance, we can also orient the presentation on your needs. So if you have any suggestion, any concrete questions, please write us an email or just include this in the follow-up questionnaire that will be sent to you slightly later, but very soon. Okay, so this will really help us, and I'm sure this will also help you.
Yes, so as Svetlana mentioned, you will be receiving a feedback questionnaire. For those that attended the first webinar, you might know what we're talking about. This is just a short survey that will take you maximum 4 minutes to fill in. But we ask you what you thought of this webinar and what your expectations for the upcoming webinars. As a reminder, we have 4 webinars that are coming, and the next one is in December. For those of you who joined a little bit late or who just want to re-listen or review the webinar, this is possible. We will upload it on the YouTube channel, the EaP Plus. I will send you the link, so no problem about finding it. I think this was really a great webinar. Thank you so much, Peter, again, for such a great job. We had over 40 people join us, which is a great turnout. We hope it was useful for you, and we hope that we'll see you again soon on our RDI webinar series. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.